Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Today, we have a very special episode planned, one that we've been preparing for weeks over weeks. We are doing our 2023 NFL preseason preview, and we're going to be ranking teams 20 all the way up to 1 over the course of the next few weeks, doing 4 teams per episode. And this is one we're really excited about. This is one we feel is going to be something we're proud of. We've done a lot of research. We've done our preparation. And with that all being said, leave a like on the video. There's going to be a lot of YouTubers making NFL previews, and leaving a like will help push our video up the pecking order. And also leave a comment about what you think about our rankings so far. But before we get into the meat and the nitty gritty of the episode, joining me from Houston, Texas, the Stat King himself, Michael Ween. How you doing?
Doing well and excited to start our NFL preview. And before we jump right into the content, let me just tell you guys, we have so many. If you like football, well, you're in the right place because we have a lot of football content coming your way in the month of August. Like a lot. Probably around close to 8 to 10 football episodes just in the month of August alone. It's going to be nuts. And that includes our NFL preseason preview power rankings. We're deciding to do it a little bit different this year. In past years, we've done it where we do AFC and NFC just right before the season. I think we tried to do it one year where we went division by division. I think we did that last year. And then we've sort of just been talking about it throughout the summer, and we've decided that we get together, we make our own top 20 lists off the air, and then we have some different things that we're going to talk about for each team before we do a over-under prediction, which I think could be subject to change. I think we should reserve the right to change our predictions because we've already seen in the first couple of days of training camp that things can happen that could potentially sway which way you want to go on your predictions. But yes, this should be fun. We don't really have much time to waste, so let's jump right into the content. We have not, of course, revealed the rankings to you guys yet, so I guess you'll just have to wait and see, number one, if your team made it in our rankings, and then you'll just have to wait and see as we go down the list to kind of piece together who missed our list. It was a tough decision once we got down to the nitty-gritty, but I think we have good reason for where each team is ranked and why each team is ranked where they are. So we love engagement. So give us your thoughts, give us your opinions, give us your feedback, and let's go. Let's get started.
Yeah, so the way this is going to work, we're going to be doing about 10 to 15 minutes for each team. We're going to be going through their 2022 summary, just overall record, season-defining wins, season-defining losses, etc., and then going through our 3 favorite offseason acquisitions for the team, their 2023 outlook based on the changes they made, and 3 most important players to team success, which we'll be getting into defining that a little bit later, and then finishing it off with our over-under win total prediction. Okay, so now revealing the number 20 team in our 2023 preseason power rankings. It's going to be the New England Patriots. Now, this is a team that I think has the ability to shatter this ranking. Absolutely. The upside of this defense is incredible. But the fact of the matter is they're in an extremely tough division. Now, getting into the 2022 summary, they finished the season 8-9, missed the playoffs, went 4-4 at home, 4-5 on the road, 3-3 versus their division. They're going to look to improve that, hopefully. Had a plus 17 point differential and went 4-4 in one-score games, 2-1 in games decided by less than 3 points. The quality wins, 29-0 in Week 5 versus the Detroit Lions, who were throughout the season one of the premier offenses in football, shutting them out. And then Week 17, beating the Miami Dolphins 23-21 at home. Now, I think with all of that being said, taking in all that information, this was a very middling football team last year. There's no question about it. But one thing that we will get into is the changes that they've made offensively, particularly at the offensive coordinator spot. Bringing in a actual offensive coordinator, that's going to be a big difference.
Yes.
And the defense, having the defensive line come back healthy, running it back for an extra year, and also the addition of second-round pick Keon White to the defensive line as well.
Yeah, it's a tough division. The Patriots were very much, as you said, middling to slightly, maybe you could argue, above average football team last year. But they, in my opinion, were severely hindered by the fact that Matt Patricia and Joe Judge were their co-offensive coordinators, and they've improved significantly on that this offseason. We'll get into that in a minute. If you remember two years ago, about right around this time or a little earlier when free agency started, before I think it was the 2021 season, so 2 summers ago, the Patriots did something very uncharacteristic of a Bill Belichick run franchise. And they went out and they spent a league high $291 million in free agency. I believe that was Mac Jones's rookie year. And if you remember, I mean, they dished out $54.5 million for Matt Judon, $50 million for Jonnu Smith, $37 million for Hunter Henry, $24 million for the safety Jalen Mills, $22 million for Nelson Aguilar. They went on a spending spree. Ever since that spending spree, they've been exactly what sort of we described. Before last year, they had to let they really, I guess, recalled their spending, didn't spend a whole lot, went back to about where they've been the past 10 years. And they had to release some veteran contributors, get rid of some guys. J.C. Jackson, of course, left in free agency. Shaq Mason, Dante Hightower was a guy that had been there a long time. Kyle Van Noy, of course, I believe he's now in Miami, if I'm not mistaken.
Return to
And,
Miami.
and so they lost. They did a little bit here and there in free agency this year, but the biggest change comes at the offensive coordinator position, and I think I'm not going to reveal whether or not I'm betting the over or under yet, but that's my main reason for optimistic in this team, in addition to some of their draft picks on the defensive side of the football, which I think will help supplement their defense and make that defense better and a little younger. I like this Patriots team going into 2023, but there were the coordinator position, the coaching staff last year was an unmitigated disaster, in my opinion. I mean, if you look at and this is the last point I'll make before we move on, what Matt Patricia did with that offense. He turned an offense that ranked number 10 in the league in 2021 with Josh McDaniels, of course, who's one of the better offensive minds in football, to the number 26 offense in 2022. And he turned a quarterback that was 10th in quarterback success rate in his rookie year, Mac Jones, in 2021, to the number 37th ranked quarterback in that category last year. The offense ranked 28th overall last year, and they were near the bottom of the league in pretty much almost all important statistical categories. Points per drive, they were 25th. Touchdowns per drive, they were 26th. 3 and outs, they were 28th. it was not good last year. So, but there is reason to be optimistic moving forward. So with that, let's get into our 3 favorite offseason acquisitions for the New England Patriots. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to alternate, or just
Let's alternate.
okay?
I'm interested to see who you have at number 3.
Okay, at number 3, I have Mike Gesicki. I actually didn't rank him in a particular order. I just did my 3 favorite overall, but I can go in sort of an order. I think with the loss of Johnny Smith, Mike Gesicki will be very used. They didn't really use Hunter Henry much as a passing threat last year. I think when you look at Bill O'Brien's first stint with the New England Patriots, they ran that offense a lot through 2 tight end sets with, of course, Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez and some of the other guys they had. I think Gesicki is going to help, especially in the red zone with his contested catch ability. That's what I think he's best at. He ranks second amongst tight ends in contested catches the past 2 seasons, and he gives them more of a vertical threat at that position, something that I think this offense needs. They didn't really throw the football a lot last year, and they were near the bottom of the league in play action. That's something I think they need to do more of. And now that they have Gesicki, who can be a weapon in the middle of the field, I like that. So I went with Mike Gesicki as my 3rd favorite offseason acquisition. I've always been a big, not big, but I've always liked Mike Gesicki as a player.
Yeah,
Coming out of
I
Penn
went with
State.
the exact same. I had Mike Gesicki at 3 as well. The interesting thing is, to me, he was kind of ousted out of the lineup in Mike McDaniel's tenure. As soon as he got in there, Mike Gesicki is not a tight end who embraces the blocking portion of the position, and for that reason, it just didn't work out under Mike McDaniel and in that system. But this time around, heading to New England, I think it's a fresh start for him, and I think red zone, third downs, just high leverage situations where you can get one-on-one matchups. He's going to be a solid target for Mac Jones. With that, I'll just go straight into my number 2. At number 2, I had their first round draft pick, Christian Gonzalez. And if you have paid attention to this podcast at all, you'd know that I am extremely high on Christian Gonzalez. And it's gone up even more so just from the fact that he ended up with New England, a team that really embraces man coverage and just the physical tools Christian Gonzalez has will be put to good use. I know that for a fact with the mastermind that is Bill Belichick. And, whether it clicks right away or not, obviously you're not going to see corners like Sauce Gardner enter the league every single year. But I think Christian Gonzalez is going to step in and immediately be their number 1 corner.
Did we do prep together? Because I have the exact same number 2. For everyone watching, we actually didn't do our prep together, but we're off to a good start. We're on the same page here. I have Christian Gonzalez as my number 2 favorite acquisition. It required a little bit of luck, as does, I think, most of the draft. I mean, you got to get the guys that you want to fall to you, but the Patriots traded down a couple spots with, I believe it was the Steelers who traded up to get Broderick Jones. They traded down and they still got the guy that they wanted, Christian Gonzalez, which I think is one of the best moves of this draft. I really like him too. He only played man coverage 25% of his snaps last year at Oregon. But as you said, his physical makeup, like his combination of length and physical strength, I think make him an ideal fit for that press man scheme that the Patriots play. In 104 snaps of man coverage last year, he only allowed 3 receptions of 10 or more yards downfield. So he was shut down for them, and I think he's going to be somewhat of the same for the Patriots. I think he's going to be really good. Might get off to a little bit of a slow start If you look at the schedule, I mean, they're playing some high-powered offenses early.
Yeah.
Philadelphia, I mean, you think about the receivers that they got with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, et cetera, et cetera. Miami with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. The list goes on and on. The Jets, the Cowboys, even like the Saints have some weapons. Buffalo. He's going to be thrown into the fire, but he has like the perfect makeup of a prototypical like Patriots shutdown corner. And they do such a good job of developing that position and they have such a good eye for that position that I trust it. And I think
Yeah.
Gonzalez is going to be a really solid player. I'll go ahead and throw out my number one. It's Bill O'Brien, like we teased earlier. Um, when we talk acquisitions, I think a lot of the times people think players, but this includes coaches as well. The NFL is a coaches league, coaches and quarterbacks league. And look, as I mentioned earlier, all you really need to know is that the Matt Patricia era was not pretty. Um, I mentioned earlier the offense finished near the bottom of the league, and the most important metrics, Mac Jones regressed in some important areas, and it just needs to get better. They need a real offensive mind in at that position. And Bill O'Brien's done it before. He has a proven track record of doing it with this particular franchise. And with the weapons that they've added with Smith-Schuster, Gesicki, a couple other minor additions. I believe they signed James Robinson also in free agency, the running back from Jacksonville. I think Bill O'Brien will do a really good job.
Yeah, I had Bill O'Brien at number one also. I think if you really want to get deep into it, it's not just the fact that he brings a competence level and just a overall execution level, but also the ability to sequence plays back to back to back in a way that's cohesive, in a way that sets up defenses and sets up openings for your offense, creating advantages. Bill O'Brien understands all of those things. And it doesn't take long watching any Alabama tape from last season to see that. Bill O'Brien utilizes a lot of bunch formations and switch releases. I can't talk today. And there was just none of that used last season. It was just a lot of, you'll see shotgun first down and they'll go under center and run power to the next play. It's just, there's no cohesion in play calling at all. And I think at the very least, Bill O'Brien will just bring some level of competence, just middle of the field passing game, going back to the bread and butter of what the Patriots like to do from this entire era of Patriots football. And whatever they were doing last year, it just didn't work.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's talk about their 2023 outlook. But before we do that, let's kind of coincide that with the three most important players to their success. So overall, what's the question here? Do you have a positive outlook for 2023? Or is it more of a pessimistic, more on the negative outlook? I have a pretty positive outlook for the Patriots in 2023. My big concern is that they have the toughest schedule in the league next year. And if you look back at 2022 last season, and you have to give credit to the Patriots staff, because if you've watched football over the last decade or so and know anything about this Patriots organization, what you know is the way that Bill Belichick, the mastermind of his defense, and this Patriots coaching staff has game plan, they've been able to really dominate inexperienced rookie and backup quarterbacks. They have thrived off doing that. And they did it again in 2022. They didn't beat a whole lot of what I would say to be elite quarterbacks in 2022. They beat Zach Wilson twice. They beat Sam Ellinger. They beat Teddy Bridgewater. They beat Skylar Thompson. They beat Jacoby Brissett. They beat Mitchell Trubisky, who's now a backup. They beat Colt McCoy, who's been a backup. I think the best quarterback they beat was Jared Goff. Within their 8 wins, those were the 8 quarterbacks that they beat in. And in this league, if you really want to compete and not only make the playoffs, but go far in the playoffs, as I think this Patriots franchise, that's what they hold themselves to, and they should, based on their 2 decades plus of success under Bill Belichick. That's what they want to do. You have to be able to compete with the elite quarterbacks and win some of those games. They have the capability to do it. I mean, the defense is good enough. I think the offense is going to be a lot better with the changes that they made. They're returning 4 or 5 starters on the offensive line. That's good. Their offensive line has always been pretty good. So I don't know. That's really my only concern, the schedule. I think the schedule is an important part of looking ahead to the 2023 season. And it is rough, but I think with their defense and the changes they made on offense, they can make it through.
Yeah, I think the argument, just from a devil's advocate standpoint, the argument is that even with the incompetency on offense, even with all of that, they still had a uh, 4-4 record in 1-score games, which, I mean, 500. It's about where they were just in general, and 2-1 in games decided by 3 or less points. So, if you're looking at it from a positive standpoint as a Patriots fan, there's reason to believe that with some close game luck, a la Minnesota Vikings, maybe, that there could be an avenue there. And the the ways to win, they already have their blueprint. It's 23-20, 20-17, low scoring games where you just slug it out. And they did it in 2021. And I think with Bill O'Brien, there's no reason for me to believe that they won't be able to at least bring back some of that success.
Let's talk about your 3 most important players real fast, and then we'll both address over/under and move on to our next team on the list. Who are your 3 most important players to the Patriots' success in 2023?
My number 3 player is Tyquan Thornton, their 2022 second-round pick out of Baylor. I think out of all of the receivers out of the 2022 draft class, this is the guy that's been forgotten about. Has legit speed at 6'4", solid route running, and for most of the season was injured, and late in the year showed flashes. I think for the Patriots to get where they want to go, Tyquan Thornton is going to have to step up. I think with Juju Smith-Schuster now in the fold, Tyquan Thornton is going to have to step in and be the number 2 receiver now that Jacoby Myers has moved on to his next team. I think he has to be the one to step up. They invested in him, selecting him as the second round pick. I mean, that's a relatively high draft pick. And going into year 2, it's time to see the results come in. At number 2, I had Josh Uche / the entire defensive line. Josh Uche, I think you couldn't go through a Patriots preview without mentioning this guy. He had 11 and a half sacks last year, and Matthew Judon even came out and said that their best pass rusher was not him. It was Josh Uche. I mean, this guy has bend and is just so incredibly athletic and just has a vast array of pass rush moves. I think going into this year, now with Christian Barmore back in the lineup, hopefully healthy, if this group on the defensive line can stay healthy, we could see another 50 sack season from the New England Patriots. And that's with that secondary, I mean, their defense is going to be scary. And then number one, I had Mac Jones. At the end of the day, the quarterback position is extremely important. And as of right now, I think the consensus would say Mac Jones is the worst quarterback in the division. I would happen to agree with that. Now, can he prove everyone wrong? Absolutely. He has the capability to do that. He led this team to the playoffs 2 years ago. Don't forget about it. But last year, he wasn't quite the same player. And obviously, the offensive struggles and the offensive play calling was well documented. So going into this year, I expect to see a much better Mac Jones. One other thing before we move on, I just wanted to shout out these linebackers on the New England Patriots. I think they have one of the most underrated linebacker corps in the NFL. Um, Juwan Bentley last year stepped into the Dante Hightower role, played fantastic. And then Jelani Tavai had 40 solo tackles with zero missed tackles. The second player to have zero missed tackles only had 9 tackles for the entire season. He had a PFF tackling grade of 90. So I just wanted to shout them out before we moved on to our over-under.
All right. Well, the over-under for the New England Patriots, as you see on the bottom of your screen, is 7.5 wins. Now, I will remind y'all that they do have the toughest schedule in the league. We've already mentioned that a couple times. But based on all the changes that they made at the offensive coordinator spot, at the receiver / tight end spot, some of the other guys they brought in through the draft. I mean, Keon White is a guy I really like. I watch a lot of college football. He was a guy I liked that second round pick by the Patriots. I like Christian Gonzalez. You look at their defense, and I don't really have to elaborate much more than you did. I mean, Matthew Judon, Josh Uche, Dietrich Wise, Jawan Bentley tied 7th in total tackles. Just really productive players all around. Now, they will miss Devin McCourty, who was the 13-year veteran and played 97% of snaps last year. He retired after 13 seasons. But I like the versatility they have in their secondary with Kyle Duggar, who can play in the box, Adrian Phillips, who can also play in the box, Jabril Peppers, and Jalen Mills. I like this defense. I think the offense will do enough. It might not. I think it's going to be at least league average. I think, and if they can get there, there's no reason to believe that they won't hit the over, even with their tough schedule. I'm going to take the over of 7.5. I actually think that's a little low for the Patriots.
Yeah, I agree. I think the avenue is there, even with the toughest schedule in the NFL. The biggest key is going to have to be just stealing division games. If you can just go even 2-4 in the division, I think that would be good enough to reach this over/under number. Just because there are some games that are winnable. You got the Saints at home. You got the Raiders on the road. Who, I mean, say what you want about the Jimmy G situation. I don't. I think that's a winnable game. Bottom line. I just think this schedule is the tough games are extremely difficult, but there's a lot of games that are. I see them on a level playing field just because of how good this defense is. Like the Chargers, for example, they've had the Chargers number for years. I wouldn't bet on them to win that game, and they wouldn't be the favorite. Absolutely not. But at home against the Chargers, that's a winnable game. That's doable.
Yeah, we both agree. Now, in terms of making the playoffs, we'll do some episode later on before the season to actually see if we see right. I mean, based on the power rankings, that I don't think the Patriots would be a playoff team based on where we have them. But they are a fringe playoff team in the AFC. There are other teams though. Like if you look at their schedule, just based on what we know going into the season, you would think like games against teams like Pittsburgh, December 7th. Of course, the games within their division could give them a big leg up, like the Jets, Pittsburgh, Miami, all those teams that may be vying, maybe even a Denver if they really improve. All those teams that will be vying for wild card positioning, we think, going into the season, those will be extra important games for the Patriots to try to win. Because if you get those head-to-heads, that helps you significantly in your chances to make the postseason as you have the tiebreaker. But with that, we'll move on to the Titans. We need to speed this process up a little bit. We spent a lot of time on the Patriots, but they were the guinea pig. Like we hadn't done this before, so it's okay. The Titans, with head coach Mike Vrabel, who comes directly from the Bill Belichick line of coaches, went 7-10 last year, despite a ton of stuff that I will go through here in a minute. I believe they finished third in their division. Was it third in their division? Behind Jacksonville. I don't have it right in front of me.
Right. They finished second behind Jacksonville.
Second.
Lost in that winner go home game.
Right. Yes.
Week 18, I believe.
And if you look at last year, I think we have to put some things into context, right? The record doesn't look great. It was a struggle to the finish. But if you really look at things, I think that going through this research, I think I like the Titans more after I've done a lot more after I did all the research than I did, coming in to doing prep for the episode. If you look at what they had to endure last year, and sometimes excuses are reasons. They were the third most injured team in the entire league. Ryan Tannehill, who was their starter to begin the season, started just 12 of 17 games. He missed 5 games with an injury. They were forced to start their third-round rookie quarterback, Malik Willis, who clearly wasn't ready to play. He started 3 games. He just clearly wasn't ready. And they were some tough games. I think he started the game in Kansas City in Arrowhead. That was rough. It just wasn't pretty. They were forced to start Josh Dobbs, who I know well because he started his career in Pittsburgh, who hadn't played in the NFL since 2020. He hadn't played a game since 2020. And they were forced to start him just 2 days after he joined the roster. They had the 8th worst net rest situation. So they were at a big rest disadvantage last year. That's going to significantly improve coming into this season. Their receivers had the one of the NFL's highest drop rates and one of the NFL's lowest on-target catch rates. They had terrible fumble luck. They had terrible field goal luck. They were extremely inefficient on offense. In fact, and we're going to talk about the team I'm referencing here at the end of this episode, as they're ranked number 17 on our list. But they were basically a complete mirror image of the team that I'm talking about. They were bad in the fourth quarters, but actually really good during the first three quarters. In fact, the Titans, despite all of that I just mentioned and more, I mean, the offensive line was terrible. They had injuries all over the place, rookie quarterbacks and backup quarterbacks starting, all of that stuff. They still managed to lead after 3 quarters in 11 games last season. That was the sixth most such leads in the NFL. The problem was they were absolutely terrible in the fourth quarter. They had a minus 54 fourth quarter point differential in the NFL last year. That was the worst in the league. They were so bad in the second halves offensively. Their second half offense, for whatever reason, was atrocious. They went 3 and out in 48% of their second half possessions last year. Almost half of their second half possessions, they went 3 and out. And that was the worst such mark in the NFL since 2016, and the second worst mark in the NFL in the past 15 years. So it was bad. They changed play callers, which I'm excited about. They made some moves in free agency, which we'll talk about, one of which just happened recently and was a big one. And I'm hoping that they also drafted a quarterback this offseason. But I'm hoping that the quarterback situation will get figured out. And I think despite all that, they still went 7-10 and actually had a chance to somehow win the AFC South. So they went through a lot. The bottom line is they went through a lot. They were terrible offensively in the second half and when it mattered most in the fourth quarter, and had a bunch of injuries, had a bunch of things go against them, and still managed to win 7 games.
Yeah, and their quality win from last year was Week 11 versus Green Bay. Their season-defining loss, Week 16 versus the Houston Texans,
Yeah, that
falling
hurt.
14-19 and ended up falling to 7-8 on the season. I think that was the loss that really did them in, because you win that game, then you go into Jacksonville with a game on the Jacksonville Jaguars instead of coming in on the back foot. You know, it's really tough to say how much the injuries really were. It really was incredible how much injuries this team had and how insane the next man up attitude really showed up for this team, just for them to be able to stay in games all throughout their roster, even before the start of the season. Just guys just dropping like flies. I mean, cornerback position, all across the defensive line, ACL injuries, they were just completely just clobbered
Decimated.
by injuries. I mean,
Yep.
decimated. But that's enough of that. I think the positive thing for the Titans is it's a new season, it's a clean slate, and in theory, I don't want to jinx anything because training camp just started, but in theory, they are healthy going into the season. So their 2023 outlook is pretty simple. I think you come in with your defensive line healthy. You had 49 sacks last year, despite all of the defensive line injuries. I mean, with Mike Vrabel as your coach, who I think is probably a top 5 coach in football, if not, then easily top 10. Um, I just think with his ability to scheme up pass rushers on stunts and blitzes to open up pass rush lanes, I think there's no reason to believe that sack number won't stay around the same. Obviously, some of it is fickle. The number that most like to look at is pressure rate, but the sack number I think is just as important because it shows just how much your defensive line is pushing the pocket and its ability to finish off the quarterback when it gets pressure.
Yeah, I'll sort of pair my 3 favorite acquisitions real quick with my 2023 outlook. The defense is really good. That's one of the reasons I like this team right now. Jeffrey Simmons, obviously one of the more dominant interior defenders in the league, signed a 4-year, $94 million extension. He got paid this offseason. 7.5 sacks, 14 quarterback hits, 5 batted passes at the line of scrimmage. He's really the interior force inside. And one of my favorite acquisitions was the addition of Arden Key on that defensive line as like a hybrid defensive end / outside linebacker. He's a situational athletic pass rush presence, which I think only adds to this dangerous defensive line. And I think he'll complement the other guy I really like on this defense, Harold Landry III, who actually missed the entirety of last season with an ACL injury, as you mentioned, as they were just decimated with injuries. But going back to 2021, he was a guy who had 12 sacks and 22 quarterback hits and will be healthy, fully healthy going into the season. And what the addition of Arden Key does is it allows Danico Autry to play more inside, which I think suits this team very well. You have Autry and Simmons on the interior, and then you have 3 really capable pass rushers with Landry, and of course, Arden Key and some other guys that they have on their depth chart. And then you look at the rest of their defense. I mean, solid players. They added Sean Murphy Bunting to play slot corner. They have a couple younger guys in their secondary that I like. They still have Kevin Byard, who's one of the better safeties, more underrated safeties in the league. I really like this defense. Obviously, Mike Vrabel comes from the defensive background, the Bill Belichick coaching tree. I like that they went out and addressed the left tackle position specifically. Through free agency, they signed Andre Dillard, who's sort of unproven, but they had to replace Taylor Lewan, and they also drafted Peter Skronsky, who I think has a really high floor and I think has versatility to play tackle and or guard. He's, in my opinion, a high floor prospect and will step in and be solid right away. And then, of course, the addition of DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, can't be totally ignored. He'll step in to fill the true number 1 receiver role in that offense. And having Treylon Burks there along with some of their other guys with Derrick Henry in the backfield and DeAndre Hopkins' familiarity in Tim Kelly's offense, who's the Titans' new offensive coordinator and their previous passing game coordinator last year, I think will help. So my 3 favorite offseason additions, Hopkins, Skronsky, and Arden Key. And I overall really like this team going into 2023 because of the division that they play in. Their schedule's not too arduous. I think they're going to get – they're obviously going to – I think they're due for some positive regression in a bunch of different categories, like I mentioned earlier. And I'm just pretty high on this team after all the research that I've done. So I like the Titans. Mike Vrabel is, of course, in my opinion, a top 7 coach in football.
Yeah, I think with the DeAndre Hopkins addition, if you remove that, then things would be a little bit different because
Yes,
it would be so many unproven guys in this receiving core again, and you would just struggle to see the avenue of high level offense. But with DeAndre Hopkins in there, then you slide Treylon Burks down to the number 2 wide receiver and Chigakonkwo, who I really like, to a more of a support role as a tight end. And now you end up with a receiving core where guys are a little bit more comfortable in their roles and more capable of succeeding in their roles. So I think it all worked out for them. Another good signing for them was Corey Levin, interior offensive line depth, and will be really important because of what we'll get to later with their 3 most important players. I think just with everything that happened last year, they learned their lesson. They just decided to go out and get as much depth as they possibly can find. Just quality veteran depth is just so important in the NFL in the trenches on either the offensive line or defensive line. So with that, we can go into our three most important players. At 3, I'm going to have Peter Skoronski with Nicholas Petit Frere. And I don't know if I said that name right, but with his suspension for the first 6 games of the season, with him betting on NFL facilities, apparently, Peter Skoronski, based on my research based on what I've seen, is competing for that right tackle spot. And it will move Corey Levin up into that left guard position while Petit Frere is out for that suspension. So early on in the year, they're going to ask a lot of Skoronski. And, coming to the draft, he was, a solid tackle prospect, but I think a lot of people were more comfortable with him at guard. But with this situation, he's going to have to step up. That's going to be imperative for them. Number 2 most important player, Jeffrey Simmons. Just a staple player for this team year over year over year. And this year it's going to be no different. With this secondary being a little bit young, particularly with Caleb Farley being injury prone, Roger McCreary being a little bit inconsistent at times. Christian Fulton was really good for the most part last year, had his moments of getting beat as well, as most corners do, obviously. But this pass rush, it has to continue to be dominant for this Tennessee Titans defense to continue to be as good as we expect it to be. And my number 1 most important player, Derrick Henry. At the end of the day, it's still his team. It's still his world. He's King Henry for a reason. And now on the wrong side of 30, I think with everything he's accomplished as a player, I think he's a lock for the Hall of Fame. Obviously, that's a different conversation, but I expect the high-level production to continue. I don't see any reason to assume that he would slow down. Obviously, they did draft a running back late in the draft with the 7th round pick, but Derrick Henry is still going to be the main part of this offense.
Good list. Just a note to everyone, I did not have, with work starting this week, I did not have time to prep my 3 most important players, but I will have those for the rest of the episodes. Plus, it's when we do something for the first time, it always goes slower than we think. So we'll try to wrap up around the hour 15 mark. I think at this pace, that's pretty realistic, but I really like that list. And I'll give you my over-under win total prediction right now for the Titans. This might surprise some people. Their over-under win total is 7.5, as you see at the bottom of your screen. I'm leaning over right now, and I reserve the right to change this before the season, but I'm leaning over, and the primary reasons are because, number 1, they have the 7th easiest schedule in the NFL, and they have some very winnable games against, of course, teams within their own division with the Texans and the Jaguars are going to be good, but why am I blanking on the other team in the AFC South?
Colts.
The Colts, who have a rookie quarterback. So 7th easiest schedule, winnable games against the AFC South and NFC South, which aren't the strongest divisions. Fresh mind offensively at the offensive coordinator spot. I think the defense, as we saw in 2022, will keep them in games like they did for most of the 2022 season. As I mentioned, they led in 11 games after 3 quarters. I mean, they were in games. They just fell apart in the 4th quarter. I think they're due for some, positive regression there. I don't think they're going to be a team that loses 4 leads of a touchdown plus at some point in the second half in 2023. I just don't think that's going to happen again. And the biggest concern is definitely still the offensive line to me, but I think adding Hopkins and some of the moves that they made will help supplement their talent, and I think they will get to 8 wins. I see an avenue for that to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I think with Hopkins in there, they're a threat to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Absolutely. I don't see a as large of a gap as people seem to believe. I still do think the Jaguars are the favorite, no question,
Yes.
but the Titans do have a argument there in terms of been there, done that, having an experienced roster and a quarterback running back duo that has been through it over and over and over. So that'll do it for the Tennessee Titans. We both decided to go with the over for them. And now for our number 18 team, a team that might surprise some people, a team that we're both extremely high on for a multitude of reasons. We went with the Carolina Panthers at number 18. And um, as you may assume with this ranking, we are both very high on Bryce Young. But it goes beyond that. We just believe in this roster as a whole, and we believe in what they're building. Um, I think going into their 2022 summary here, they finished 7-10. Obviously, missed the playoffs. Went 5-4 at home, 2-6 on the road. They're going to look to improve that. Went 4-2 within their division. I think that's going to be a record that they'll look to replicate for sure. Minus 27 point differential, not great there. 3-5 in one score games and 1-3 in games decided by less than 3 points. Their main quality win was against Tampa Bay in week 7, where they won 21-3 at home. And in week 14, they beat another quality NFC playoff opponent in beating the Seattle Seahawks in Jacksonville, which for some reason, when I was doing this prep, I did not remember that game at all. So I had to go back and watch the highlights of that game. I was like, I had no idea that that game existed. But anyways, their season-defining loss was in Week 17 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where they lost 24-30 in Tampa Bay. New coaching staff, new lease on life, new quarterback, moving up to the number 1 overall pick. A lot of change here with the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, and some needed change because this franchise has been through the ringer the past 4 or 5 years. If you look at what's happened with the Carolina Panthers, they've been through a multitude of quarterbacks, which I'll get to in a minute. Money can't buy happiness, and it sure as hell can't buy wins in the NFL. David Tepper tried that strategy, their new owner, and failed miserably with Matt Rule. Since Tepper, who's the richest owner in the NFL, or one of the richest owners in the NFL, bought the Panthers as he was before a minority owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, so I kind of know his background. Bought the Panthers back in 2018, and since then the team has gone 29-53. That's the 5th worst record in the NFL. They've had 0 winning seasons, 0 playoff appearances. They've been through, I believe it's 3 head coaches, with Ron Rivera, of course, who was fired midway through Tepper's 2nd year as owner. And then Matt Rule, of course, who a lot of people were excited about when he came in as sort of this upstart, highly successful college coach who had rebuilt a lot of college football programs from the ground up. Baylor, I mean, you go back years and years. I mean, he's done it basically everywhere he's been, and now looks to do the same thing at Nebraska this upcoming year. Good luck to him, but it just didn't work out. As I mentioned, they went through a ton of quarterbacks. Rule really didn't believe in drafting and developing a quarterback for whatever reason. So he proceeded to just rotate through a bunch of different subpar options for the most part. He signed Teddy Bridgewater, then traded him. They cut Cam Newton, and they signed him back. They traded for Baker Mayfield, and they cut him after 7 games. They traded for Sam Darnold, and they let him walk in free agency. They signed Matt Barkley, then they cut him. They signed P.J. Walker. They signed James Morgan. They signed Jordan Ta'amu. They drafted Matt Corral, who we've yet to see. They traded away Kyle Allen. They cut Will Grier, who they drafted a couple years back. It's been a revolving door, to say the least, at the quarterback position. But now they finally got their guy. And I think a guy that can be a top 10 quarterback, I think even by the end of this season.
I agree.
I know that might sound insane to some people, but with what the Panthers have on their offense, despite trading away DJ Moore, what they still have on this offense, I think, and what all the young talent that they have on defense, with a defensive coordinator in Ajiro Every, who not a lot of people know a whole lot about because he's new to this Panthers team. And Frank Reich did a fantastic job at hiring a fantastic coaching staff. But I think with he's one of those guys like D'Amico Ryans that I think could be on the fast track to being a head coach in a couple of years. Just keep an eye on him. So it's been a rough couple of years for the Panthers, revolving door at quarterback. They've sort of built up the offensive line. Of course, they've lost a couple really good cornerstones to that franchise with Christian McCaffrey, and some other guys who have been traded and or cut, like I mentioned with Cam Newton and some other
DJ
guys.
Moore.
Yeah, DJ Moore, Steve Smith, of course, way back when he retired. But I think they're overall for both of us is a very positive outlook for the Panthers. We've done this dance multiple times with teams that we're really high on coming into the season that are just sort of like the unknowns, sort of in a way, coming into the NFL seasons, like one of the bigger question mark teams. Like, oh, we see a scenario where this team could be really good and we want them to be good and we believe that they will be good, but then it hasn't really turned out that way in most cases. So that's why I'm kind of worried, but I think this Panthers team is a little different. Frank Reich, excellent head coach. And I think will finally give them some stability with his veteran presence, his organizational skills, his ability to hire a great staff, his offensive acumen, his ability to work with young quarterbacks, as we've seen. I think it's an A-plus hire. I think drafting Bryce Young is an A-plus move in the first round, as he's my number one, actually my number 2 favorite. I mean, they're interchangeable. Frank Reich and Bryce Young as my 2 favorite offseason acquisitions. I kind of addressed 3 and 1 there, like my overall 2023 outlook with 2022 in the past years with sort of my favorite acquisitions. I also really like the receiver they drafted, Jonathan Mingo, I believe out of Ole Miss. He's one of my 3 favorite acquisitions. I think he pairs really well with the other guys that they have in that room. And I think he's due for a pretty big role in this offense. So I don't know. That was kind of a ramble, but that's sort of where I stand right now on the Panthers, and I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, my 3 favorite offseason acquisitions for the Carolina Panthers were 3. Jonathan Mingo, who you just mentioned, has, I mean, great talent, just has to put it all together from a production standpoint. I think he was limited a little bit by Ole Miss's scheme and a bunch of other factors, but I think showed what he could do at the Senior Bowl and showed off his route running ability. And I think going into the NFL level, I don't think he'll be asked to do a whole ton right out of the gate. They have other receivers that they hope will be ahead of him on the depth chart, but when asked, I think Jonathan Mingo can produce. Number 2, I had Thomas Brown, their offensive coordinator. And with this move, I think with the hiring of Frank Reich, the one concern people may have is whether or not the NFL has passed him by in terms of offensive scheming. And with hiring Thomas Brown, plucking him away from the Los Angeles Rams under the Sean McVay coaching tree, and with that wide zone passing game, you remove some of those questions. Frank Reich has been around the NFL, has coached under a lot of different regimes with a lot of different coaching styles. And the one style that he hasn't come across is just so happens to be the wide zone offense. So they're covering all bases here. And worst case scenario, you just have Frank Reich as your CEO type of coach, which I think is a role he's great in, by the way. And just let Thomas Brown and Ajiro Evero run the offensive defense as offensive and defensive head coach. So I think either way, they're in a great spot because of bringing in Thomas Brown. Now, number one, I had Bryce Young. Pretty self-explanatory. I think here's a hot take. There is an avenue for Bryce Young to be a top 3 quarterback in the NFC by the end of the season. And it seems very bold until you look at the NFC quarterbacks, which we actually just did pretty recently. Go watch our NFC quarterback bracket we just did recently. Um, the opportunity is there, and I'm actually higher on this receiving core and just this group of weaponry in general than most people are. So I just think the running game, the offensive line, the structure is in place. I like the scheme that they're going to run. I think they check a lot of boxes.
Yeah, their roster is really good. It's, in my opinion, the best in the division. Now, I don't think when you really dig deep, as I guess I'll reveal to you guys right now, excuse me, the Falcons, a team in the Panthers division, they were a team that barely missed out on our power rankings list. Just going to spoil that right now. They're a very interesting team, as are the Panthers. And I think people are sort of overlooking the Falcons right now, in my opinion. The Saints, of course, have a new quarterback and could be a competitive football team. And then, of course, we don't expect much from the Buccaneers this year, but who knows? I mean, crazier things have happened in the NFL. So no division is like overly easy. I mean, all these teams within the divisions have familiarity with each other. They know the personnel, and these games are typically pretty close. So they can go either way. Things can happen. Injuries can happen. But when you look at the Panthers roster, going back to my original point, to be honest, there aren't a whole lot of holes. Like, I mean, what they did at the receiver position, adding a guy like Jonathan Mingo, who I think is an ideal receiver to pair with Bryce Young because of his ability to produce after the catch. That's what he thrived on in college. He generated lots of yards after the catch. And with, other guys that they added, the speed with a guy like DJ Chark Jr., a veteran like Adam Thielen. Those were two signings that were relatively cheap that I liked at the receiver position, and bringing in a really solid tight end and a reliable pass catcher at the tight end position with Hayden Hurst. I mean, they've really reconfigured this offense. They did a pretty damn good job considering they traded away DJ Moore, but that got them Bryce Young. And if Bryce Young turns into what we think he's going to turn into, that's not even a gamble. That's you got to get the quarterback right.
It's a no-brainer, right? And I will address one thing just from a maybe the pushback that may occur from seeing the Panthers at this spot. I think from a standpoint of likelihood to make the playoffs, I think it's pretty clear why we would rank the Panthers higher than the Titans and the Patriots, just because of the conference they're in, the division they're in. And also, there's also an argument that, all three of those teams we've mentioned are very similar in terms of how they're going to win and their overall play style as well. So, it's, these power rankings are fluid, and just because your team may not be as high as you would want them to be, don't take it personal. It's splitting hairs here. Um, Now I'm going to get into my top three most important players for their upcoming season. Number three, I have Terrace Marshall. He was the forgotten one from the 2019 LSU Tigers, that legendary offense that just destroyed the college football landscape that year, obviously, with Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. Terrace Marshall was the third guy on that team, and he was also very productive. Ended up staying for the 2020 season and was a part of that LSU team that completely fell apart after those three guys eventually left. So the first year in the NFL, a little bit of a slow start, but showed flashes towards the end of the season. And he's on the short list of guys I have throughout the entire NFL who I think will break out this season. I truly believe in his talent. I really do. And if Bryce Young can just develop the chemistry with him, I think people are going to be in for a surprise. I'll just say that. Number two, I have Brian Burns. The Panthers are really counting on this guy to take the next step into the higher echelon of pass rushers. I think in terms of pass rushers, I think there's tiers with. I think tier one, you have the Nick Bosa's, the Micah Parsons, the Myles Garrett's of the world, TJ Watt. Tier two, that's where you'd find a guy like Brian Burns. And it really comes down to implementing a little bit more power with that speed and just having that consistent production, and just being dominant week in and week out, snap in and snap out. I believe in it. Absolutely. I think he's capable. It's just whether or not he can get it done on the field, and make it happen. And number one, I had Bryce Young. Um, there's no question in terms of what this team has proven. The teams behind them have probably proven more in terms of what they've done in the past, just from a quarterback position standpoint. But Bryce Young, I would argue, is more talented than both of those quarterbacks, just stepping foot in the NFL. And, you may think we're high on Bryce Young, but I'm gonna double and triple down on it. I'm gonna die on this hill. Bryce Young is legit, and all of the size concerns. I mean, the dude doesn't really get hit. I mean, good luck trying to land a hit on him. He's quicker than you think. He's more agile than you think, and he knows how to get down and protect his body. So I think Bryce Young is their most important player.
Absolutely. On to our over-under prediction. Going back to my point, I think the roster is really well-rounded. It's a really good roster with a lot of young talent, especially on the defensive side. They made additions at all three levels of the defense. When you look at it, they added a guy who I think's going pretty under the radar to most football fans, Shai Tuttle, who is actually the nephew of Refrigerator Perry, who's like one of the greatest interior defensive linemen of all time, famously with that 85 Chicago Bears defense. They added him from New Orleans. I think he's going to help them in the run game up front. They have Deshaun Williams. They have Derek Brown, who is one of the team's most talented players. I think he has Pro Bowl potential. They are switching to, I believe, a 3-4 defense from the 4-3 defense they were playing because, of course, Steve Wilkes left and they have a new defensive coordinator. But I think those players will fit that system. You mentioned Brian Burns, who they're relying on to be the centerpiece of this defense, and I think he can. He's still young, 25 years old, 12 and a half sacks. He's recovering from offseason ankle surgery, which worries me a little bit, but I think he definitely has the talent, and he's in that upper tier 2 of pass rushers, as you spoke to. And then I love their secondary. They added Von Bell from the Cincinnati Bengals, um, who could help the Panthers' issues with forcing turnovers because he has forced 15 fumbles in his career. So he's a pretty opportunistic safety. Then I love J.C. Horn. I have since the draft. Then, of course, Xavier Woods and Dante Jackson and some other young players in their secondary. It's a really well-rounded roster. The offensive line will continue to improve. I think Bryce Young will be a top 10 quarterback by the end of the season. The one thing I'll say, though, before I wrap this whole spiel up, I think they need to get off to a decent start. They have their bye after 6 games. So they play 6 games, they have their bye, and then they play from about Halloween to the end of the season. So they play 11 consecutive games. Their schedule before the bye, if they're not careful, could get a little. It could definitely play a role in altering the way we view them going into the second half of the season. If you look at it, they open up 2 straight divisional games right out of the gate. It's vital that you don't start 0-2. You got to win one of those games, preferably both, because if you look at what you have after, going to Seattle will not be easy. Minnesota, I mean, that's no sure win. At Detroit and at Miami before the bye week. They need to make sure that they don't dig themselves a deep hole going into the bye week. But I do think they will reach the 8-win mark just because their schedule after the bye week, I see a lot of opportunities for them to get hot as they kind of did last season near the end of the year. And I think all the moves that they made on the coaching staff and throughout the roster will make them better. So I'm really high on the Panthers. I think they're going to win their division. I'll just say that right now.
I think in terms of value, they're the best value bet in terms of betting to win a division throughout the entire NFL. I think as of right now, they have the third best odds behind the Falcons and Saints. So definitely get on that if you're into betting. Okay, now for our last team we're going to do tonight. The 17th team, who we alluded to earlier, the Minnesota Vikings. This team last year was, let's just say, an outlier. Finished the season 13-4, went 8-1 at home, 5-3 on the road, 4-2 within their division, -3 point differential, which is the number that was well documented last year, and 11-0 in one-score games, 5-0 in games decided by less than 3 points. Their quality wins at Buffalo, 33-30 in overtime with that amazing Justin Jefferson catch in OT, of course. Week 6 at Miami, they went 24-16. Their season-defining loss is, they lost in Week 11, 3-40 at home against the Dallas Cowboys, and then in the wild card round, lost at home against the New York Giants. This team, I think, their defense can't get any worse. Obviously, they have a young secondary. They've made a lot of changes on their defense, but I think the arrow should be pointing up by week 8, week 9, week 10. Once Brian Flores gets his fingerprints onto this defense, we know the track record he has, and I'm confident that he'll be able to just construct a much better unit out of the talent that's here. I really do believe that they did upgrade talent-wise at a lot of different positions. They had to get rid of a few veterans that were really important to their team, including Eric Kendricks, who was a multiple-time All-Pro, and that loss is definitely going to hurt. But throughout their entire secondary, I think they're deeper, they're younger, and they're going to grow together as a unit as the season goes along.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, not much to add from that perspective. I will add in a couple stats. As you mentioned, they were the team that was sort of opposite of the Titans, like I mentioned, that I was referring to earlier in the episode. The mystery team, if you will. The Titans were a terrible fourth quarter team, but were fairly good in the first three quarters. The Vikings were a complete mirror image of that. They were just the NFC version instead of the AFC version. They were actually terrible in the first three quarters. They had a minus 87 point differential in the first three quarters last year. Ranked 30th in the NFL, so not quite last, but close to last. I know it's hard to believe that there were teams actually worse than that.
Wow.
So if you go through their schedule and you calculate their record, if games ended after three quarters, and games obviously don't end after three quarters, but if they would have, and you don't include what they did in the fourth quarter, which I'll get to here in a second, the Vikings would have gone 7-10 as a football team instead of 13-4 or whatever they went in 2022. But that's where the fourth quarter comes into play. The fourth quarter, they were actually, when you really look at it, they were one of the better fourth quarter teams we've seen in the past decade. For whatever reasons, I don't know. Maybe Kevin O'Connell had something to do with that. They just turned the switch on come the fourth quarter. But they scored 169 points in the fourth quarter last year. That was by far, in a way, the most in the NFL. And they had a plus 78 point differential in the fourth quarter. So they were, for whatever reason, getting smoked in the first three quarters, but absolutely smoking teams in the fourth quarter. And as you mentioned, they had some really good luck in one-score games. They went 11-0 in one-score games in 2022, the best mark in NFL history. I think we all know that they're due for some negative regression in that category. It's probably not going to be that good in 2023. But at the same time, I think, if they don't get off to such slow starts, maybe they won't be in as many close games because their defense is improved. If they can get a lead earlier in games and not be forced to come back so much and be in those close fourth quarter games, which they were so much last year, I think what's going to be an improved running game with, they had a bunch of injuries on the offensive line last year, which we'll talk about a little later. With a solid quarterback, with improved weapons, with the addition of Jordan Addison along with Justin Jefferson. I think, and with the improved defense, if they get off to faster starts, I think they'll be in better situations, not be in as many close games. So I think it kind of goes both ways, but there will be some negative regression there. And that's one of the reasons I'm somewhat skeptical going into this season, as I think a lot of football fans are. They're not going to have that much success in one-score games. It varies year to year for all teams. And that was sort of like a historical mark. I mean, no team has ever gone 11-0 in one-score games in NFL history before the Vikings did it last year. So they're obviously going to regress a little bit, but you can kind of see both points of views.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's more likely that it's more of a regression to the mean more so than bottoming out in that category.
Yeah.
Which, well, it's the hope, obviously. Hopefully they don't bottom out, but there's no reason to believe they would with how potent this offense really is. Now, I mentioned earlier they did lose quite a bit of huge contributors on defense last year. Eric Kendricks, one of the staples of this Vikings defense all throughout, going back to the Mike Zimmer era, multiple time All Pro. I mean, the dude was just everywhere, all over the field. Um, and then also let go of Chandon Sullivan, Patrick Peterson, Duke Shelley, and Cam Dantzler, um, who were their four leaders in snap count at the cornerback position. So um, huge holes to fill there. Depending on how you look at it, it's addition by subtraction for some of them, but that's beside the point. Um, my next point is Danielle Hunter is going to have to be leaned on even more so this season. Um, they traded away Zadarius Smith. They brought in Marcus Davenport. And Marcus Davenport obviously is better than the sack total that he put up last year, which was 1.5 sacks. But he hasn't shown that he can bring that sack production that this Vikings team is going to need. So Danielle Hunter is going to have to deliver. He's going to have to stay healthy. And my next point is the arrow should be pointing up, as I mentioned earlier, around week 8, 9, and 10. That's where we can judge this team, I think. And, obviously there's a lot of young players in this secondary. Um, Byron Murphy being the elder statesman at 27 years old. So a lot of youth, a lot of growth needing to happen, but week 8, 9, and 10, that's where you can kind of judge for yourself where this defense is at.
Okay, I'll real quickly get into my 3 favorite acquisitions for the offseason for the Vikings. My number 1 was Brian Flores, adding him at the defensive coordinator spot. Major change was needed on this defensive coaching staff. Of course, they lose Mike Zimmer. Weren't great defensively last year due to a variety of reasons. They added some talent. They brought in Marcus Davenport. They drafted a couple guys that will add depth. They had some injuries in the secondary last year to some of their younger players. They'll be back healthy and expected to take a step up. I think Brian Flores, he made a good defense in Pittsburgh better last year. And he's done it his entire career. He's just one of the great defensive minds. Again, coming from the Bill Belichick coaching tree. So Brian Flores, Jordan Addison, again, spent his last year at USC, won the Bolitnikoff in his last year at Pittsburgh, his I think it was sophomore season. He's going to immediately step into that number 2 role aside Justin Jefferson in that offense with the departure of Adam Thielen. He's got the versatility to play slot because of his really good route running ability. I really like Jordan Addison. There are a couple concerns there, but I think he'll thrive in this Vikings offense. And then I like pretty much all the moves that they made in their secondary, but I particularly like bringing in Byron Murphy, who had 4 pretty good seasons in Arizona, was really starting to come into his own as a player in Arizona, as one of their better players on that defense. But a back injury slowed him down in 2022 last year. But he should be coming back healthy, and they desperately needed secondary help this offseason. They addressed that, so give them credit for that. They also drafted Jay Ward, the safety from LSU, in the 4th round, and then they had another guy. It was someone, Mekhi Blackman from USC. So right. I like what they're doing in the secondary. They're, of course, bringing back Lewis Seen and Andrew Booth, 2 guys that they drafted, I think, the previous year, who will be expected to take on bigger roles in the secondary. They're young. They're versatile. They've added talent at all 3 levels, as I mentioned, with Marcus Davenport. And I think this offense is going to be just as good as it has been in the past because they returned all 5 stars on the offensive line. If you look at last year, I believe their center, Darisaw, their draft pick from last year, and one other. I mean, they had injuries all over their offensive line. And I just think that they're going to, if they stay healthy, they're going to be better at running the football. And their offense is going to be good because Kirk Cousins is a top 4 quarterback in the conference. So I expect the Vikings right now to win over 8.5 games, and I kind of feel weird taking the over for all 4 teams that we did today because I feel like all 4 of these teams in a way can be argued as like, I don't know, fringe playoff teams. Like they could definitely be playoff teams, but also things could go wrong. Their schedule toughened significantly. In fact, they have to play all 4 conference championship finalists from last season. They got to play the Chiefs, the Eagles, the Niners, and the Bengals. Those are 4 of the top 5 Super Bowl favorites coming into this season, and rightfully so. And it's fair to assume that, of course, their luck in one-score games will regress to the mean. But again, I love adding Brian Flores to the defensive coaching staff. I like the moves they made in the secondary. I think they're going to be more consistent running the football. And I think it's reasonable to expect better health on the offensive line. And Kirk Cousins is one of the better quarterbacks in their conference. So I see probably a 9 or a 10 win season rather than a 12 or 13 win season for the Vikings this year. But I still think they're going to be a pretty damn good football team.
Right. Yeah, I agree. For my 3 favorite off-season acquisitions, I had at number 3, I went a different route. You could argue whether or not this counts, but I had TJ Hawkinson. The more I thought about it, the more I was like, with a full offseason to scheme him into the offense, a full offseason to get acclimated, I think this will act as a key acquisition just from a impact standpoint. Number 2, I had Byron Murphy. They needed a nickel corner really, really badly. And he's going to fill that spot, and he's going to fill it well. $8.7 million per year, solid starter level money. I think even you could argue a discount. And then number 1, Brian Flores. We've covered it a bunch already. Not going to go deeper into it. One other thing I wanted to mention is the cutting of Eric Kendricks. I think is a experiment worth keeping an eye on. If you look at their linebacker core at the moment, Jordan Hicks is their main inside linebacker, along with Brian Asamoah. I think this is kind of an experiment into positional value and where you want your high contract players to be on your football team. So whether or not that works out, yet to be seen. I think Jordan Hicks is solid, but he's certainly not Eric Kendricks. So that's a spot that's definitely worth keeping an eye on for the Minnesota Vikings for sure.
So real quickly, address your over/under win total prediction, along with your 3 most important players.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it quick. 3, I had Jordan Hicks. I just mentioned him when I talked about the Eric Kendricks signing or Eric Kendricks
Being cut.
release.
Yep.
And then number 2, I had Andrew Booth Jr. High expectations out of Clemson. Was okay last year. Didn't really make a ton of splash plays, but will have a bigger role this year and will have more opportunities. Number 1, you could go many different directions here. Considered Daniil Hunter at this spot, considered a bunch of different players, but I couldn't go through a Vikings preview without mentioning this guy. It's Justin Jefferson. He's the key to this offense. He opens up everything for everyone else, and he's on pace to be one of the best receivers ever.
Yeah. I mean, look at what he's done his first, 3-4 years in the league?
I think it's 3.
He's ranked in the top 3 in, I think, a lot of those categories. Touchdowns, receiving yards, receptions. I mean, he's, if not top 3, he's top 5 in those categories. He's insane. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Emmy, I think we're going to need to accept the fact that as much as we love football, and as much as that we're excited that it's back, and as much as we want to put into making these particular segments, this power ranking stuff, the best that we can, give you guys as much information as possible. These episodes, there's no way we're going to be able to keep these episodes to under an hour. We've been doing a really consistent job of that in all our other episodes, which I think is good. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the length of those episodes. Been trying to keep them to around 45-ish minutes. But these episodes, I just don't think there's any way. Like we'd be selling you guys short if we, didn't give the proper amount of time that's needed to cover everything that's happened in the offseason, give you our outlook, summarize what happened last year, and wrap it all in a bow tie with our over-under predictions. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We'll find a way to, if one of these teams is one of your teams, we'll find a way to timestamp each team so you can skip to your team if you would like. Leave your feedback. Leave your opinions on all 4 of these teams. Do you think they should be ranked higher? Do you think they should have been ranked lower? What do you think they're going to do in 2023? Are you taking the over or under? We love fan engagement. And as I said at the beginning, we have a ton of this type of football content along with other football content and maybe some very special guests coming in August. So
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for that. And we'll have another episode or 2 this weekend that will be released next week, which will be fun as well. Not going to give you guys too many details. We're going to keep it a secret. But until then, you have any parting shots?
Just keep an eye out for these episodes being released as team by team clips. I think I'd probably consider having each team be its own video on our channel. So keep an eye out for that. And let us know what you think of this format. I really enjoyed this format personally. So if there's any changes you'd like to see us make, leave them down below and we'll implement them into their next episode.
Okay. So just like the days without being able to talk about football, just like the NFL offseason, as training camps have started, we are going, gone. Peace out.
Just like Joe Burrow's calf. Peace.
That's another story.